Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we are talking about bluebooking. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about getting comfortable with the Blue Book and citations. And this is important for any law student who's planning on doing legal writing, which is basically every law student, or anyone planning to work on a law journal. Well, first off, Lee, what is the Blue Book? And will every school use exactly the Blue Book?
Well, every law review will definitely use the Blue Book, but you may also hear about Allwood citations, which is an alternative citation guide. But basically the Blue Book and Allwood, they are both guides to tell you how to cite legal resources, both when you're in practice and for law journals. But law journals always follow the Blue Book, and in the real world, they follow the Blue Book as well. So if you get introduced Allwood at school, it's likely you will retire it for the Blue Book by the time that you are too well. So it's a little weird, but almost everyone's going to touch the Blue Book at some point in their legal career.
Right, which is literally a book that is blue. And confusingly, It also has blue pages, which you typically use in practice, but also white pages, which you typically use for law journals. So let that be your first introduction to just how confusing the Blue Book really can be.
No, it's totally true. And the basic idea is, as you're writing anything that somebody else is going to read, you need to tell people reading your work where you got the information you're talking about and how they can find it if they want to read it. And if you've done legal research, if you're at your point in your legal career where you've done legal research either by reading your own paper or reading other people's law review articles, you will understand that if you were doing a deep dive into a topic, oftentimes you do go read the things that people are citing to. Or in practice, as Alison and I will both talk about how we used citations and Blue Books in practice, you also have to look up what people are citing and make sure that they say what it's actually saying and things like that. I mean, it is actually a very practical thing that you need to be good at.
Oh, absolutely. And it's also one of those things that employers, whoever they are, really expect you to be able to do. You know, if you are the low person on the totem pole, oftentimes your job will literally be to do the final cite check, to do the final corrections on the citations. And so you need to be able to do that with, a certain degree of facility. So if you think this is just something that you're never going to use, that is absolutely not true. And it's something you need to get good at, because if your employer expects you to do it and you can't, that's kind of a disaster.
Yeah. So Alison, your first job out of law school was to clerk. So did you use your blue booking skills in the courts?
Oh, well, we definitely used legal citations a lot. I'm sure in opinions, probably we cited stuff. I'm guessing we must have.
I don't know. Most legal opinions I read, they have some citations.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we had citations.
Sure.
I would say it was actually, in terms of citations, I spent more of my time actually looking them up in the documents we received than I did personally adding them. Obviously, if I was writing something for the judge, like I would add citations and he expected them to be right. But it was actually really astonishing sometimes what people thought they could get away with. I remember one instance where someone had cited a case, and it was frankly for like a silly proposition. It wasn't even like a particularly important case. And, there are rules in the Blue Book about how you do edits and, with ... and your brackets, you can remove things, whatever. But, I went and looked up the actual case and they had edited out a not.
Oh, that's a key word usually.
Yeah, you're like, that's not the type of edit we're talking about. This case does not stand for what you think it stands for. And you know that. It was like, whoopsie.
Yeah.
So, I think people sometimes think this stuff doesn't matter and you can just kind of do whatever you want. But let me tell you, when you find that as a law clerk and then you tell the judge, like, hey, FYI, like that's probably not a hearing that's going to go very well for you as a lawyer.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I had a similar experience when I was a first-year associate in Big Law. we were a corporate defense firm. And so the plaintiff side counsel had just been filing motions in limine, like a stack of them about all the things you could imagine. And so I got the least important stack, basically, with the directions of like, respond to them. And I was like, okay. But when I started checking the cases and checking their quotes, there were mistakes all over them. And then it became this weird, like, I'm going to find all your mistakes game. Like, I guess it was still that I hadn't been too far out of my editing and the law review phase, because it became like this weird game. I would look at the cases and I loved finding when they'd screw up quotes. And then I got to stand on my soapbox as I was writing my response to like pick apart the fact that their work wasn't particularly well done. And it was really interesting to me and a little eye-opening at how much sloppy work can be done. And if you can come to your job with some solid skills in this department and an appreciation for how important this accuracy is, it can really make you stand out as you start your career.
I think that's absolutely right. People think this sort of thing like is just trivial. It doesn't matter. But, as anyone who's become like a judge or a law firm partner or any of these things, that you're submitting work to probably has some idea of what this should look like. And if it doesn't look right, then that just really can destroy your credibility fairly quickly. I mean, even if you're not trying to completely change the meaning of a case, you just need this stuff to look professional. And I think that's a really key part of this is just, yes, it's tedious and yes, it's boring sometimes, but you need to get good at it because otherwise people are not going to take your work seriously.
Yeah. So we were also both on a law review.
Ugh.
And
some of us
I know
more
you
willingly.
loved your law review experience so much.
Law review was not my favorite activity. I found it pretty tedious, let's be honest.
Yeah. I was a little more all in. And I was one of the editors my third year. But we both spent a lot of time working on editing legal citations there too. And I think the law review is really Bluebook boot camp because that is your job. You are reading and editing so many rounds of citations and checking sources that, if you go through that experience of being on a journal in law school, even if it's not a law review journal, a lot of this stuff is going to become second nature.
Right. I mean, I definitely did not learn really to Bluebook properly until I was thrown into it as a 2L and just handed stacks and stacks and stacks of pages of things that I had to go through. And, someone else was checking them later, at least in the beginning. And so it made me get much better. I mean, certainly after writing just, one legal writing assignment or two, and then a moot court brief, which is basically all the legal writing really seriously done that first year, I was not particularly like fluent with the Bluebook. But I was after a few months on the law review.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. We were helping some students with some Bluebooking recently, and it has been let's say a few years since you and I were doing a lot of Bluebooking. And it was funny because I could still look at it and know that something was wrong, but I didn't remember the rules to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'd send me stuff. I'm like, that doesn't quite look right. Like, what's the problem? I'm like, I can't tell you what the problem is. I can just tell you it doesn't look right. So like that sixth sense of like, something seems off here is really like what you develop when you do this a lot.
Yeah. But then it also is interesting because your supervising attorneys are going to have a similar reaction,
right?
Depending on, how their practices or how they are doing their writing and things like that. But it's also important to remember that even the people who don't do this all the time, if you invested a lot of time and did develop these skills, you don't completely lose them. They still are rattling around in there in your brain somewhere.
Right. And I will definitely say, I mean, I had situations working in a law firm where literally every person on the team from, the summer intern up to the partner, everyone was doing site checking on that last few hours.
Mm-hmm.
So, even the partners were diving in and like getting the stuff done because someone had to do it.
And it's important because
it needs to be right.
It needs to be right.
Don't like it. If it's not right, they don't like that.
No. And clients don't want to hear that their lawyers screwed up their citations, their briefs. Not for what they're paying for.
Yeah, like basically this is one of those things that pretty much does need to be as perfect as possible.
Yeah. So when a lot of people get their first Bluebook, there is also an online version, but I still do like the paper version. We're going to talk about that later. But a lot of people find it very intimidating. So Alison, why do you think the Blue Book is so intimidating for people when they get started?
Well, I think number one, there are just so many rules. And frankly, most of these rules you're never going to use. I would say you probably use routinely, say 10 to 20% of the rules in the book. And then
Probably.
there are probably another 50% that you literally never look at. So sometimes people think they have to sit down and kind of like memorize this book. And that's just not really the way this works. The rules themselves can also be confusing when you first get started because you're just like, what in the world? Like there's a lot of cross-referencing. You might have one rule that refers to a different rule that then refers to a table. The thing is, all of this gets easier with practice. So, when you have that physical book, you learn pretty quickly, like, hey, maybe I want to tab like table 6 or whatever it is, that you use like all the time. So it does get easier as you practice.
Yeah. And I think you just have to be willing to kind of dive in. I think that one of the things about the practice is if you just try and use it once for one paper, that's not going to make it easy to really learn the Blue Book. You have to, if you're going to do some sort of journal, and I think that even if you don't want to be on the law review, some sort of journal, moot court, something where you have to write and cite and source check extensively is really good, almost like a boot camp for practicing. If you're planning on practicing with any sort of litigation element to it, that requires court filings as you're going to have to like cite things. So these are skills that you want to work on, and you almost want to commit to working on them because I think everybody expects you to have them.
Right. I think it's also useful to think of it as sort of two different parts. One is the case where you're writing a paper and you have to do your citations. So that's kind of, you start from scratch, you figure it out. In some ways, I think that's actually easier than having to cite check someone else's work. So one of the good things about a journal is it's actually similar to what you would probably be doing in practice. Is like you didn't necessarily create these citations from scratch. So if I created something from scratch, I personally have a pretty good system where I'm not going to screw things up that much. But if someone hands me a page of stuff I've never seen and someone else has written and maybe they don't have that system, like I actually have to develop a different skill set to be able to go through that and make those accurate.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point.
So you want to try to do both basically in school.
Yeah. All right. We wanted to cover a few Blue Book basics for folks who might be feeling a little intimidated by taking on their first experience with the Blue Book. So as we already kind of mentioned, the Blue Book does have some organization to it. So the beginning of the Blue Book are these quick reference pages, which, you were mentioning that there's such a small percentage of the rules that you look at constantly. And I think that the quick reference pages cover a lot of those rules. I think that's a good place to start. Cases, statutes, like quick things, periodicals, law review articles. You're still going to have to look at these tables we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but that's always a great place to look first, especially as you get more comfortable with the rules. Then you've got the blue pages, which are really for practitioners. If you're in law school, and especially if you're working for any sort of law journal, you do not want to reference those pages. You have white pages, which are for law reviews. And so that is what you're going to focus on if you're doing any sort of law review work. And really, that's what most people want you to use for any sort of academic papers in law school as well. They want you to focus on those white pages. Now, there are also these tables at the end that seem like they shouldn't be that important, but they are incredibly important. You will really use these tables the most because it tells you how to abbreviate case names and other commonly used words. It tells you what reporters to use for every state, how to find a citation for state statutes. You really kind of do a deep dive. It's like table 6, table 10. And so you typically want to tab those and know what are in those tables so you can quickly reference them. And then if you can't remember where anything is organized, of course, there's an index. And if you're in the online version, you can just use the search functionality instead of an index, which is a little bit handy about the online version. So, Alison, have you gotten a chance to really play with the online version of the Blue Book?
I'll be honest, I really haven't. I think you've spent more time with it than I have.
I did. I couldn't remember if I drug you into that.
No, I think I was more like, I know that exists, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So the online version didn't exist back in the day. And I have tried to use both. And if you have access to the online version and the paper version, I think it's nice to use both of them, but it's also nice to think about what's easier to use for the type of work that you're doing. whether, like you said, if you're creating your own citations or doing citation checking. So I personally am a big fan of the tabbing the Blue Books with little plastic tabs so you can quickly flip through it to find those commonly used rules and tables. The other thing that I really like about the book is that you can scan all the examples, which is somehow how you get your questions answered, your very nuanced questions, is you're kind of looking for an example in these rules that looks a lot like whatever you're trying to cite or cite check to. And I think that I'm just not as good of a skimmer on the computer. For some reason, I find it just easier to have the book there, to use my finger to kind of go through and look for those examples. I mean, the content's the same. It's just presented in a different way. The online functionality does have something interesting because they have this pin technology. The bottom right hand of the window, they've got like a little push pin, and you can pin a rule to have it show up in a pin guide, which... What's kind of interesting about this is you could almost make your own kind of quick citation guide. So if you were doing, let's say, a paper that was full of statutes from a certain state or a certain kind of international treaty, you could pin the rules that you're going to use constantly and find them very quickly. I thought that was kind of cool functionality, and maybe faster for some people. I also thought that the search functionality is nice if you wanted to be able to search for something very specific. But, all in all, I still have to prefer the paper version, but I think it's good to have both. But I think the paper version still has a lot to offer.
Yeah, I think they have kind of different pros and cons. And it's just a question of sort of, probably mixing and matching and figuring out what's going to work best. I mean, they're not super expensive. You can have both.
Yeah. Or I'm sure the school will help you get you access to both.
Yeah, I'm assuming you probably can access both of them pretty easily.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we were reminded the last time we kind of circled back to doing Blue Book work was that you also need to think about your computer and all sorts of keyboard shortcuts that you can use to make citation work easier. And I think pretty much any law student is going to need to do this at some point in their career. It's going to make it so much easier.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you think like, oh, I don't need whatever, but then there are all these little specific things, you need like your, what do you call that little squiggly S looking thing? Like the
I think it's a section.
Yeah, like the section. I'm like, I don't even know what it's called, but you obviously use it all the time. Or like the backwards P or like the M dash. The other thing people need to set up somehow is like shortcuts for small caps, because you actually use that quite a lot in citing, things like books and law review articles. So whatever your computer needs to be able to do that, you kind of got to figure that out.
Yeah. And I did go ahead and pull these for what they currently are for Mac and PC. So if you want to look them up, I know, but if you want to look them up in the transcript later, if you're like listening in your car, you can do that. So on a Mac, the shortcut for small caps is Command-Shift-K. And for PC, it's Shift-F3. So check to see if those work on your machine. If not, you can manually set up shortcuts, and that will make it easier to do some of the stuff than going to like font and clicking all these boxes. That just gets old when you're doing a lot of this work.
Yeah, I mean, definitely you want to be able to put in the section symbol without having to like go into your characters, you just want to be like Control S or whatever you set it up as,
Yep, exactly. So if you are starting to familiarize yourself with a Blue Book, or you're trying to do maybe some pre-work before a law review write-on or anything that you need to do that includes Blue Book work, I think it's really important to start with kind of the 5 most common citations that you're likely going to see. These are cases, statutes, law review articles, periodicals, books, and internet citations. And internet citations can be so many things. That's a pretty big bucket, but that can be PDFs on the internet, web pages, news articles, but so often now, like stuff is on the internet that we're researching. And so getting comfortable with how you represent that in a legal citation is very important.
Definitely. And with all of these, you want to make sure you know both the full citations and the short cites, which are basically the shortened citations that are available to you in specific circumstances. Once a full citation is included for a certain period of time, as you would guess, there are rules around all of this. Yep. And also people should understand things like, the id and the supra and all these kind of things. And it may matter whether you're in the text or in the footnotes. These are all things to pay attention to.
Yeah. So as you practice more and more, you're going to start noticing that there are common things that are missing in citations if you're practicing editing, or that there are common mistakes that you will make as well. But some of the things you always want to watch out for sounds so simple, but every citation ends with a period at the end of the footnote.
Yeah, which I kind of forgot about. I was like, wait, why are all these periods everywhere?
I know.
I know. Oh, right, because they have to be.
Because they have to be. And so it's one of those things that you always want to look for those periods. The other thing that's very easy to screw up are that commas are in the right places. Commas are very important in citations. Almost think of it as like an address, like it's usually like Los Angeles, comma, California, because you want to separate those two things. Does Washington, D.C. have a comma? I don't know. Some people might have to look it up. Like the commas are very kind of powerful in the citation and how it's broken up. And so you have to watch where those commas are and make sure that they're in the right places.
Yeah, definitely. It is funny, don't you think, in an address, we like put a comma between the city and the state, but then the zip code just goes straight in there.
Yeah, but I think that's because the zip code's a number. There's no confusion about whether the zip code and the state are connected to each other.
Makes sense.
I think if the zip code had letters in it, then maybe it would have a comma.
Who knows?
I don't know, but why do we do a comma between I guess the reason we do April 29th, comma, 2020
numbers.
Is because they're all numbers. But in Europe, when they do 29 April 2020, they don't because they're
Can't
all
be
separated.
Confused. Yeah.
Nope. Well, things you don't think about very often.
Exactly. And there are probably rules around all of these. Other common things you see, URLs are not generally going to be hyperlinks.
And this word makes this so painful because they always make everything a hyperlink.
So if it puts it as a hyperlink, you have to take it out. You have to take out the formatting. It can't be blue. It can't be underlined. All these things. The small caps, I don't understand why we use small caps, but hey, it's the Bluebook. If it needs to be in small caps, it needs to be in small caps.
I think after my time in the law review, I think I did my resume in small caps, like my name at the top of my resume.
Oh, I think I might have too. I thought it looked very elegant or something.
I think that was
doing.
I think that was a super geeky law review thing to do.
I mean, I like small caps. I'm just really unclear on why we still use them. I'm not sure what value they add to anything.
No, but I'm pretty sure I got kind of obsessed with them after the law review. I don't think we use them anymore. But nothing we ever work on has small caps in it anymore.
No, they're totally antiquated. And then you look at the Bluebook and it's all over the place.
Maybe we should bring back the small caps. We can look at that for our next round of styles that we focus on. I think the other thing, and I am terrible about this, is making sure all parentheticals that are opened are closed at the end. This can get really tricky.
Yeah, see, I never messed that up because I was a programmer.
Oh, yes. Well, see, I was a terrible programmer too.
Yeah, no, that'll break your entire code.
I know. Back in the day when I was a consultant, they sent me to coding camp back outside of Chicago. And I was like a organizational psychology major. So I was supposed to tell people how to implement code into their workplace and implement systems. But they thought everybody needed basic understanding of code. So they would always take someone who was like me and match me with somebody who was like a CS major. So we'd be on these teams. And it was the trick was to teach the CS major patience to teach me to code. And then it was for me to try and learn from the CS major.
Right.
So we were coding some sort of website with a shopping cart. That's all I remember. And we were each supposed to do it in parallel. And I mean, my code was literally broken beyond belief. And at one point he looked at I just tapped his shoulder and I was like, my code is broken. And I'm like, and I don't know why. And so he takes my laptop and he scans the code and he looks down and he's like, will you go get me more Diet Coke? This is going to take a while. And he goes, please stop writing. It's going to be harder to fix your code than it will just be to write new code. And I was sounds good. Sounds good. So I was just snack delivery and Diet Coke delivery. And then I've never really coded since then. So
yeah. Well, had you done that, you would have gotten really obsessive about paying attention to how many opening parentheticals you have and how many you need to close. And this can get very confusing because a lot of these citations, you may have multiple sets of them and you really do have to make sure they're all closed.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 in a row. It's really,
you have to count.
You have to count. And, and so it is something that oftentimes, unless you are a programmer, you don't focus on, and you have to create new habits.
Right, exactly. You can go through with like different colored highlighters and mark off each one to make sure they match, all that kind of stuff. There are techniques you can use, Lee. I know you'll be surprised to make your code work or make your law review article perfect.
I gave up on the coding. I just gave up. I was like, you didn't hire me to code. I don't know why I'm here.
Well, I mean, after you spend like 2 hours tracking down one bracket that didn't get closed, you start paying attention to these things.
It's true. It's true. Although I did see their point that if we were going to work on these teams, we had to have a basic understanding of how code was built. And to be fair, that knowledge, the basic understanding and knowledge did come into play sometimes. But they didn't pay me to code.
They were probably good thing.
They sent me to meetings with coders to tell them what to tell the clients.
Yeah. Well, I think the key point here, whether it's coding or citations, is the more you do this, the better you will get. And frankly, some of this really is about developing processes.
That's true. That's true. And making sure that common mistakes don't bring you down.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we've seen is people even have a list of common things that are problems for them and globally. And, before you submit this document, you go through and you make sure okay, what do I tend to mess up? Because we all have things we tend to mess up.
That's true.
You need to check that. If you're doing your own citation, say for a paper, we highly recommend that you start a master citation document. And so this is basically a way to keep all of your citations for all of your sources at easy reach. So you probably want to have a full cite. You probably want to have a short cite. You make sure these are perfect. And then you can copy and paste them as you need them.
Yeah. I mean, this is really life-changing when you do a big paper, because you don't want to be typing in citations over and over again.
Oh, no. Definitely do not do that.
No. Do not do that. This is where copy and paste is your best friend. But that master document has to be 100% perfect.
Right.
And so you do need to spend a lot of time making sure that those citations are exactly perfect.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that can be helpful for people is when you're writing to only include full citations until you're completely finished with your drafting. And the reason for this is that you can only use short citations, which are the truncated versions in certain cases. And so if you reorganize things, you don't want to end up in a situation where you have, the short cite before the full cite or something like that, because that's going to make a mess. Your footnote numbers might change. And if you're citing to, case whatever at footnote 3 and now it's footnote 5, this stuff can get a real mess.
Yes. So I think what you want to remember is that, now, which may be slightly different than even some of your earlier work in law school, there needs to be a whole process for finishing the footnotes and proofing the footnotes to make sure that they are cited correctly. So if you can use these full cites to begin with, then you have this opportunity to do this cleanup process at the end, which is just going to be so much easier than fixing problems once you're still editing the body of the document.
Yeah, and I'll real caution people, not to do stuff like this with a huge find and replace at the last minute. I remember my moot court partner did that, and I got an email from him at literally 4 a.m. or something. It was oh my God, do you have an old version of my document? I've just copied and pasted, find and replace the wrong thing, and now everything's totally screwed up. And I was are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But that happened. You got to be careful.
Got to be careful. It's important to also keep in mind that if you are on a law review or any law journal, that you're likely to get trained in the Bluebook by your school or by the journal. But it's also important to note that most law reviews are going to have their own style guides.
Ooh, fun. What's that?
I know. Well, if it wasn't enough to have an entire book with rules, each individual journal can create additional rules. And they can actually choose to opt out of some Bluebook rules, which is also very annoying and interesting. But this could either change some of the rules from the Bluebook or clarify how to handle common issues that constantly come up. And typically, style guides will override the Bluebook. So if you do have a style guide from your school, you want to know it well. And if any rules contradict the Bluebook, I would recommend to take your physical Bluebook and write in notes to yourself, either with the updates from the style guide or referencing the style guide. So you can always refer back to it. That's one of the nice things about the paper blue book is you can actually like edit it on the page.
Right. Fun fact. You may not know this, but the law review I was on, we actually helped write the blue book.
Oh, aren't you fancy?
Well, I just recall like these enormous arguments that people were having, like between, it wasn't even just between, like a person and one, it was like between schools at some point over like what the blue book should contain or if an example was correct. It was pretty insane, I will be honest.
Isn't it like Harvard, Yale, and Columbia?
It's like some consortium of like,
yeah.
I don't remember exactly who's in it, but it's something like that. And every like 10 years they do an edit. And it happened to be when I was on the law review that we were having to do this ridiculous edit. So we were editing pages of the blue book for our like blue booking assignments.
That's a lot.
It was really meta, I will say.
Yeah. And they just did an overhaul of the blue book a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. Okay. Well, if you are struggling with understanding the blue book or figuring out a process to do these writing assignments, you're always welcome to reach out because believe it or not, maybe not shocking, some of the tutors in our team, we all loved us some blue booking. Someone, I won't name her here, has a t-shirt, a blue booking t-shirt.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm not even sure I've seen that.
Yep. We've got former technical editors. We've got people with t-shirts. Like, come on over. Come on over.
People can help.
Talk about it. I don't have a t-shirt.
Nor do I.
But hey, never say never. You just never know. Anyway, you can always reach out to us and we're happy to help you get more comfortable with your blue booking. Any final thoughts on citations or blue booking, Alison, before we wrap up?
No, I think I would just mostly say as a person who this does not seem naturally interesting to, I think it's important to understand that this is actually a really important skill set and is something that you will use and it's something that you really should take seriously. And it does get easier. So, I mean, I found it very painful. I'm not a detail-oriented person, and this is pretty much the definition of extremely detail-oriented. But you will get better at it, and it's worth investing some time and energy into.
Yeah, and it just makes you so much more professional once you hit your career. It's just very important. It's part of how you present yourself.
Right. Well, it's also just
writing.
like this is actually something you'll be expected to help with.
Yep,
exactly. And you need to be able to do that because if you hire someone who doesn't know anything, basically, and you're like, okay, well, at least you can do the check the citations and get that right, and then they can't do that. You're like, what use do you have?
Yeah,
it sounds harsh, but
no,
like that
true.
is your utility.
It's true, and it is just about practice and getting comfortable with it, and don't let it get too intimidating. When it all comes down to it, it's just rules. Like the blue book will tell you what to do.
Right. It's all there somewhere.
It's all there somewhere. Okay, well, with that, we are out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or Alison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.